He was just a struggling single dad late to a job fair he almost missed entirely. But when a woman turned to him and said, "I've been waiting since 2009, his entire world shifted. What happened next wasn't fate, it was something far more powerful. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about resilience, kindness, and second chances, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Struggling single dad was late to the job fair. She turned and said, "I've been waiting since 2009. The parking lot was nearly empty when Jack Branson finally pulled in the clock on the dashboard, glowing 10:44 a.m. The job fair had started at 9. He exhaled, forehead resting briefly against the steering wheel before lifting his face and offering himself a half-hearted smile in the mirror. "You made it," he murmured, grabbing the worn folder with his resume inside, creased, modest, and freshly printed at the library that morning. The sleeves of his flannel shirt were still damp from helping the old woman who'd fallen near the crosswalk. Her groceries had scattered across the sidewalk, and though the job fair had already been slipping away from him, Jack couldn't bring himself to ignore her cry for help. "Thank you," she'd whispered, gripping his arm as he helped her to the curb. "You're a good man." He wasn't sure about that anymore. The convention center loomed ahead, glass doors gleaming under Montana's early spring sun. Jack's boots echoed against the pavement as he jogged up the steps, ignoring the tight pull in his right knee, an old injury from years of working hunched under trucks. He reached the doors and pulled one open, only to be met by a wall of silence. The once bustling fair had thinned. Tables were half-packed, company banners folded into carts, recruiters chatting quietly as they prepared to leave. A woman in a sharp gray suit walked by him, tablet under one arm, Starbucks cup in hand. "Sir, the fair's wrapping up." "Most of the employers have already left," she said with the kind of professional politeness that stings. Jack nodded stiffly, his mouth dry. "Yeah, I figured." He stepped inside anyway, scanning the rows of dismantled booths. Maybe someone was still looking. Maybe there was still a chance. His steel-toed boots creaked as he walked forward, every sound magnified by the vast emptying hall. And then a voice behind him, low, female, a little breathless. "You're late," it said, teasing, but tinged with something else. He turned. A woman stood at the far end of the hall beside a banner that read, "Warner & Comer Urban Renewal Initiatives." She held a clipboard against her chest, her other hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked familiar, and then she smiled. "I've been waiting since 2009. Jack blinked. The words didn't compute. He took a step closer. She looked about his age, early 40s, but polished in a way he'd never quite figured out. Hair dark and sleek blazer tailored. But it wasn't the outfit that jolted something in his memory. It was the eyes, stormy gray, clear, knowing. "Excuse me," he asked cautiously. She stepped forward. Interstate 90, December. "You were driving a red pickup with a rusted fender. I had a dead battery and no cell service." Jack stared at her, stunned. The snowstorm, 16 years ago. A young woman stranded in a beat-up sedan, shivering in a coat that was too thin for the weather. He remembered pulling over without thinking, tools in the truck bed, his daughter burning with fever back home, but he couldn't just drive past her. He jump-started her car in under 10 minutes and barely said a word. She'd tried to thank him then. He just nodded and left. And now she stood here in heels holding a clipboard, remembering. "You're," he breathed. "You kept that memory I never forgot," she said simply. They stood there for a moment, two lives circling back into a moment neither of them had planned. The empty hall around them seemed to hush further, as if the world was leaning in to listen. Jack broke the silence. "That was a long time ago." She nodded. "It was, but it changed me. And now," she offered a faint smile, "maybe I get to change something for you." He frowned, glancing around. "You running this thing, I am." She extended her hand. "Ellie Warner, CEO of Warner & Co. We've been expanding projects in community development, especially job training and trades. My team and I sponsor the fair." Jack shook her hand, still slightly dazed. I don't have a great resume," he admitted. "Been working at Parker's Garage for the past 8 years. It closed last month. Before that, mostly short-term repair, work towing contracts. Nothing fancy, just trying to keep the lights on." Ellie nodded. "I'm not looking for fancy. I'm looking for real." She paused. "And I know real when I see it. Jack's brow furrowed. So, what exactly are you offering? She took a breath, studying him. There's a pilot project my company is funding. A mechanical rehab program, refitting old machines for public infrastructure. School buses, farm equipment. We train young people, give second chances. We need someone who knows how to fix things not just with tools, but with patience. Jack rubbed the back of his neck. Why me? Ellie's eyes softened. Because 16 years ago in a snowstorm, you saw someone who needed help. You didn't ask for a reward. You just fixed what was broken and left. She reached into her leather folder and pulled out a faded note card. Yellowed, slightly creased, handwriting unmistakably his. Batteries fried. Jumper'll hold for now. Get it replaced. Be safe out there. JB. I've had this in my drawer for 16 years, Ellie whispered. Not because of what you wrote, but because of what it meant. That kindness mattered. It still does. Jack swallowed his throat tight. He had no words. She tucked the note away gently. Come by the site tomorrow. 9 a.m. Just take a look. No pressure. Jack hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right. I'll come. As he turned to leave, Ellie called after him. Oh, and Jack, he turned. She smiled. Try not to be late this time. For the first time in what felt like months, he chuckled. The sound surprised even him. Outside, as he stepped into the sunlight, something inside Jack shifted. Not everything broken had to stay broken. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something being fixed. Starting with him. Jack stood outside the convention center longer than he meant to, sunlight brushing across his worn boots, as he watched a few latecomers drift past clutching pamphlets and tote bags. His hands were still tingling, not from the handshake, but from the surreal moment that had just unfolded. 16 years ago, a random act of decency during a snowstorm. And now that moment had looped back, stepped out of time, and smiled at him in heels and a tailored blazer. Ellie Warner. He repeated the name in his head like it was something he should have remembered, though. Back then he hadn't asked. He'd just seen a young woman in distress jump-started her car and left. His daughter had been sick. He had no time to linger. He never imagined that fleeting encounter would mean anything more than a passing gesture. But it had meant something. To her. And now she was the one offering help. He climbed into his truck, a beat-up Ford with a cracked dashboard and a stubborn ignition, and just sat there, fingers wrapped loosely around the steering wheel. He could still see her face. The same kind eyes, though older, wiser. More grounded. It wasn't just nostalgia he felt, it was gravity. Something anchoring him to a new possibility. A second chance, maybe. The thought both warmed and scared him. The next morning, Jack woke before his alarm, which almost never happened. Emily had already left for class, a sticky note left on the fridge in her handwriting. You got this, Dad. Try not to grumble too much, E. He smiled as he tucked it into his pocket, then pulled on his cleanest pair of jeans and a long-sleeve Henley shirt. No tie. He didn't own one. His boots were freshly scrubbed, and for once he took the time to shave. At 8:45, he pulled up to the address Ellie had scribbled on the back of her business card. It was a low-slung brick building on the edge of town, once a welding shop, now in the early stages of transformation. A sign hung on temporary fencing, Warner & Koch Mechanics Initiative Rebuild. Retrain, renew. The doors were open. Tools buzzed inside. Young voices bounced off the walls. Jack stepped in and blinked. It was a controlled mess. Benches, half-assembled scrap parts sorted in buckets, and two teenagers trying and failing to disassemble a lawnmower engine without stripping the bolts. A man in his late 20s wearing safety goggles approached. You the new guy? Jack raised a brow. Not yet, the man chuckled. Fair enough. I'm Manny, lead trainer. At least I was until they told me someone better was coming. Jack looked around. Where's Ellie? She's on a call. Said to give you the tour. Manny walked him through the space, pointing out workstations explaining their goals to take at-risk youth and give them hands-on skills that could translate into real careers. Jack nodded as he listened, impressed by the scope. They weren't just fixing engines here. They were fixing lives. At the back of the shop stood a rust-covered John Deere tractor, flanked by tool carts and engine diagrams. Manny gestured toward it. This one's yours if you stay. It's been sitting dead for 5 years. No one's had the patience. Jack walked over and crouched, running his fingers along the frame. Rust flaked under his touch. Doesn't need patience, he murmured. just someone who speaks the language. Behind him, a familiar voice said, "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." He turned. Ellie had arrived dressed casually today, jeans, boots, hair tied back. She looked younger like this, warmer. Still confident, still grounded, but without the corporate shell. Jack stood. "Looks like you've built something good here." "We're trying," she said, "but it needs more than vision. It needs heart and hands." He hesitated. "Why me, Ellie? I mean, I appreciate the offer, but there are people out there with degree certifications, people who didn't come to a job fair empty-handed." She stepped closer. "Do you know how many resumes I've read that are full of buzzwords but say absolutely nothing? You show up, you help people, you care, you do the work. That's what I remember about you, and that's what this place needs." Jack looked around again. He saw himself in the teenagers hunched over their projects. He saw his younger self full of quiet skill and unspoken doubts. "What would you want me to do?" he asked finally. Ellie smiled. "Start by fixing the tractor. Show them how it's done. If that goes well, we'll talk next steps. And if I say no, then I'll find someone else. But they won't be you." Jack smirked. "You always this persuasive, only when I believe in someone." By mid-afternoon, Jack was elbow deep in the engine bay, sleeves rolled up, grime on his hands, Manny beside him, asking questions faster than Jack could answer. The teens gathered around curious. One of them, Miguel, maybe 16, asked how he learned to fix things without college. Jack wiped sweat from his brow and said simply, "I had to." When you've got a sick kid and the furnace dies in the middle of January, you don't wait for a manual. You figure it out. The boy nodded. "My mom's car won't start half the time. I want to fix it." Jack looked at him. "You will. Start with learning how to listen. Machines talk. Most people just don't take the time to hear them." Miguel's eyes lit up. As the day ended, Jack washed his hands in the shop sink, catching sight of Ellie watching him from the doorway. She wasn't checking on him, she was observing. Quiet, thoughtful, and maybe a little hopeful. "You planning to pay me in compliments or wages?" Jack asked, drying his hands. Ellie grinned. "Wages? And if you stay, benefits." Jack chuckled. "It's been a while since I had either." Her smile faded into something gentler. "Then maybe it's time." They stood there, the hum of the workshop behind them, the setting sun casting long shadows through the open doors. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like he was running behind. He felt like he might actually be arriving. By the end of Jack's first full week at the shop, the rusted John Deere tractor had begun to hum under his hands like a wounded animal beginning to stir. It wasn't purring yet, not even close, but it was no longer dead. Like him, maybe. The air inside the garage had a new rhythm now. The clang of tools, the low murmur of young voices, the occasional whoop of triumph when someone finally dislodged a seized bolt. Jack didn't have to raise his voice much. He just showed up, and things began to move. Still, the hardest machine to crack wasn't the tractor. It was the kids, especially Miguel. 16, sharp, quick with his hands, quicker with sarcasm. But beneath the swagger was something brittle. A boy used to being disappointed, used to people walking away. That was something Jack understood too well. One afternoon, as the sun baked the concrete outside and the garage fans spun in tired circles overhead, Jack crouched beside Miguel at the workbench, watching him reassemble a carburetor. The boy's fingers moved fast, but not with confidence. Jack placed a gentle hand on his wrist. "Slow down. You're not racing anyone." Miguel muttered, "My mom's going to lose her job if I don't fix her car by tomorrow. We don't have time for slow." Jack didn't push. He just nodded. "All right, but she'll still need a car that works longer than a day." Miguel didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. Progress. Across the room, Ellie stepped in, clipboard in hand, but no blazer today. She'd made a habit of dressing down when she visited the site. Fewer barriers that way. She moved through the space like a quiet current, checking supply lists, chatting with the other trainers. But Jack noticed how her eyes always found their way back to the students. She didn't just build things. She invested in people. Later, as Jack washed grease from his hands, Ellie approached a thermos in each hand. "I figured you might be a coffee after 4 p.m. kind of guy." He smirked, accepting the cup. "You figured right." They sat outside on the low steps of the building, looking out over the back lot where broken-down vans and mowers waited in the weeds like forgotten soldiers. You remember everything from that day, don't you? Jack asked quietly. Ellie's eyes crinkled at the corners. I do. It was nothing he said. It wasn't. They sat in silence a moment. I was on my way to meet my father, Ellie said softly. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. He didn't show. I waited at a diner in Missoula for 3 hours before realizing he wasn't coming. That car battery dying on the highway, it felt like. I don't know, punishment. Jack turned to her, brows furrowed. And then you showed up, she said. Didn't ask questions. Didn't make me feel like a mess. You didn't even ask my name. I didn't think it was my place, he said. She looked at him. But that's what made it matter. He didn't know how to respond to that. So she added, that night changed me. It made me want to be the kind of person who notices, who shows up. Jack's throat tightened. No one had ever said that to him before, that his existence had made someone better. He'd spent years just surviving, pushing through days like a man underwater, hoping to keep breathing long enough to see his daughter graduate. He never thought of himself as someone who inspired anything. Until now. He sipped the coffee, stared at the horizon. After my wife died, he said quietly, I told myself I'd do everything right. For Emily. But somewhere along the line, I stopped thinking anything I did mattered beyond that. I didn't let anything in, not even people. Ellie didn't speak right away. When she did, it was with quiet understanding. Well, looks like we're both learning how to let things in again. Jack looked over at her. She held his gaze without flinching. That weekend the garage was closed, but Jack came in anyway. The John Deere wasn't just a project, it was a metaphor that had started to nag at him. It was stubborn, uneven, ugly in spots. But there was potential in it, buried beneath grime and years of misuse. He could feel it. He laid his tools out carefully. The sunlight streamed through the high windows. He worked for hours alone, radio humming, classic country in the background. And just after noon, he flipped the ignition. The engine coughed. Once, twice, then caught. The sound was ragged, uneven, but alive. Jack stepped back, breath-held hands trembling a little. He didn't cheer. He didn't fist pump. He just stood there with a kind of reverent stillness, the way a person might look at an old friend who finally woke from a coma. He turned off the ignition, wiped his hands, and sat down on the floor beside the tractor. For the first time in a long time, he felt more than useful. He felt whole. On Monday, when the teens returned, Jack let Miguel turn the key himself. The kid's eyes widened as the engine roared to life. You did it, he whispered. Jack clapped a hand on his shoulder. We did it. Miguel grinned, trying to hide how much it meant. Across the room, Ellie stood by the door. Arms crossed, smile slow and sincere. She didn't say anything she didn't need to. But as their eyes met, Jack felt something shift. They weren't just fixing machines here. They were restoring faith in people and second chances in the quiet ways goodness ripples out long after a single act. And for the first time since 2009, Jack started to believe that maybe the world hadn't passed him by. Maybe it had just been waiting for him to catch up. The next Monday morning, the garage buzzed like a beehive. A new shipment of salvaged equipment had arrived, everything from busted ATVs to an old-school bus axle, and the younger trainees swarmed the crates like kids on Christmas morning. Jack stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, trying to look stern while suppressing a smile. The place felt alive, and Jack, for the first time in years, felt useful in a way that went beyond keeping the lights on. Ellie arrived mid-morning, jeans and work boots again, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Jack noticed that she no longer wore perfume when she visited the shop, just the faint, clean scent of sawdust and coffee. She moved through the space with easy grace, greeting each student by name, pausing to ask real questions. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was part of the soil here. Jack, she said, waving him over, got something to show you. They walked to a small side office she'd had converted into a planning space. On the wall were large sketches and photos, pinned up schematics of workstations, maps of nearby towns, handwritten notes scrawled across blueprints. This, Ellie said, pointing to a folded map of rural counties west of them, is the next phase. If we can prove the pilot works here, I want to open 3 more sites by the end of the year. Jack blinked. 3. We've got the framework. Land agreements are nearly done. Equipment donations from a few ag suppliers. What I don't have yet, she paused looking at him, are enough people I trust to lead. Jack chuckled softly. You trust me, I do, even though I still don't own a single necktie. She smiled. That's why. Jack studied the map again, tapping a rural town called Willow Creek. You know, I used to tow tractors out of that county. Place has more broken engines than people. Exactly. That's where we start. Fix what's been left behind. He glanced at her a little stunned by the scope of her vision. But it wasn't ambition he saw in her. It was resolve. A kind of quiet crusade. And it stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Later that afternoon, Jack stayed late. Not because he had to, no one was watching the clock, but because the energy from that planning room lingered like a spark he didn't want to lose. He sat in the back corner of the garage, the one spot where the light hit just right in the late hours. A half-disassembled snowblower sat in front of him, but he wasn't focused on it. He was writing. A letter. Not to anyone alive. To someone who lived only in memory. Hey Lila, it's been 16 years. Emily's almost grown now. You'd be proud. She's tough. Smart. Got your laugh, though she tries to hide it. I don't know why I'm writing tonight. Maybe because I met someone. No, nothing like that. Not yet. But she saw me. Not the shell. The real me. It's been a long time since anyone did. She remembers something I don't even think I deserve to be remembered for. But maybe that's what kindness is. It comes back when you least expect it. Anyway, just wanted to say, I think I'm finally standing up again. Love always, Jack. He folded the letter, tucked it into the worn notebook where he kept thoughts he never intended to share. Then he went back to the snowblower and began to piece it back together. The next day, something shifted. Jack arrived to find Ellie in the office pacing. Her phone was on speaker, a man's voice on the other end, sharp-clipped, impatient. We're not against your mission, Ms. Warner, the voice said, but the board is looking at numbers. The return on this investment isn't measurable. We have to consider alternatives. You mean automation, Ellie snapped. There was a pause. Replacing outdated skill-based training with scalable systems is the logical next step. The human element is inspiring but not efficient. Jack lingered outside the door unseen. I'm not building machines, Ellie said. I'm building people. Then I suggest you find more persuasive metrics, or will recommend reallocating funding. The call ended with a cold click. Ellie exhaled and leaned on the edge of the desk, staring at the floor. Jack cleared his throat gently. She looked up. Sorry, she said. Didn't mean for you to hear that. Jack stepped inside. They're pulling support. Not yet, but the pressure's mounting. I fought to get this pilot off the ground, but if we don't show measurable outcomes soon, Jack frowned. You're already changing lives here. Doesn't that count for something? Ellie gave a tired smile. Not to people reading spreadsheets. A heavy silence fell between them. Then Jack spoke. What if we showed them something they can't ignore? She looked at him. Like what? He gestured to the garage. Let them meet the kids. Let them see what we're building. Ellie hesitated. A presentation won't be enough. These people are used to numbers and charts. Jack's eyes lit with something fiercer than usual. Then let's give them both. That evening, Jack called Emily. I need your help with something. You need help with technology, you mean? I need someone who knows how to tell stories with data. Emily grinned on the other end of the line. You want to impress a bunch of board members, Dad? I want to show them the truth. She agreed, and by the weekend, she was in the garage, laptop open, interviewing students, collecting quotes, piecing together a visual narrative of what the shop had done in just 1 month. Lives touched, skills learned, confidence rebuilt. Miguel even agreed to record a video testimonial. I didn't know how to fix anything before I met Jack, he said. Now I know how to fix a whole engine, and maybe my life too. Jack pretended not to tear up behind the camera. On Sunday, Jack returned to the shop alone. As he stood beside the tractor, the first thing he'd fixed here, he ran his fingers along its now gleaming body. The engine was smooth, reliable. But more than that, it was a symbol. He pulled out the notebook. Another letter. Lila. They might shut this down. The people with suits and money, they don't see what I see. But we're fighting. For every kid like Miguel. For every dad like me who thought life had passed him by. If you were here, you'd remind me what I already know, that kindness is the one investment that never goes to waste. Wish me luck. Love, Jack. He tucked the letter away, stepped outside, and looked up at the wide Montana sky. A storm was brewing, but this time he wasn't the man stranded in it. This time he was ready. The meeting room at Warner & Cummer headquarters wasn't made for people like Jack. It smelled faintly of leather and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and the long glass table reflected the anxious faces seated around it, investors, board members, and consultants dressed in the kind of clothes that never came near grease. Jack sat near the end of the table, in his cleanest work shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, a stubborn streak of oil still clinging to his knuckles. Ellie sat beside him, composed but tense, her face framed in determination. Emily hovered near the back of the room, laptop in hand, ready to cue the presentation Jack had rehearsed for 3 days straight. "This isn't a charity pitch," Ellie began firmly. "It's a sustainable long-term investment in workforce development. Our pilot site is proving that vocational training for underserved communities is not only viable, it's replicable." One of the men across from her, gray-haired, square-jawed, with a watch that probably cost more than Jack's truck, tilted his head. "The spreadsheet says otherwise. Your overhead is high, the ROI is vague, and we don't invest in emotion." Jack felt the words like a punch to the chest. Ellie didn't flinch. She gestured toward Jack. "Then maybe you should hear from someone who doesn't live inside a spreadsheet." Jack cleared his throat. His voice was lower than he meant it to be when he began. "My name's Jack Branson. I'm a mechanic. Been one for most of my life. I've rebuilt engines in the middle of winter with no heat and a flashlight duct taped to my head." A few chuckles flickered across the room, mostly polite. "But none of that made me feel like I mattered, not until I walked into that garage 2 months ago and met a bunch of kids who looked like they'd already been written off. And then they watched me fix a tractor. And for the first time, someone asked me to teach, not just to fix." He paused, then nodded to Emily. She clicked a key. The projector lit up, showing photos Miguel with grease on his nose, a group of teens high-fiving after finishing their first working lawnmower, Jack kneeling beside an engine while a girl named Sarah carefully adjusted a carburetor. Then a short video clip rolled. Miguel's voice crackled through the speakers. "I didn't know I was good at anything." Then Jack handed me a wrench and said, "Try." He didn't walk away when I messed up. That was new. Jack looked around the room, eyes meeting theirs one by one. "I've worked under people who shouted, who cared about the clock more than the work. But at that garage, something changes. These kids learn to trust themselves. You want to talk return on investment?" His voice grew firmer. "You're not investing in a business. You're investing in second chances." Silence settled like dust. One of the women near the front, mid-50s, sharp eyes, pearls around her neck, leaned forward. "How do you know this isn't just a fluke, that these kids won't fall back into the same patterns once the novelty wears off?" Jack didn't look at Ellie. He didn't look at Emily. He looked inward and then straight at her. "Because I fell, and someone helped me back up. Not with money, with a moment. A single act of kindness that took less than 10 minutes but stuck with me for 16 years. Now he turned to Ellie. She didn't blink. She didn't owe me anything. But today she offered me everything. Not because of my resume or my degree, but because of a memory, a dead battery on a snow-covered highway, and a stranger who stopped to help. Ellie finally spoke again, her voice quiet but resolute. "If you want to invest in numbers, fine. But if you want to invest in people, real people who get up every morning and choose not to give up, then this is where you start." The silence stretched long and taut. Then the man with the watch sighed. "We'll review the projections and come back with a decision next week." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no, and somehow Jack knew they'd won more than they lost. Outside the boardroom, Jack let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Emily walked up to him, grinning. "You crushed it, Dad." He shook his head, dazed. "I'm a mechanic. I shouldn't be in rooms like that." "You're wrong," Ellie said, stepping beside him. "That's exactly where people like you belong." He looked at her, the buzz of adrenaline still wearing off. "You think it worked? I think some walls cracked today," she said. "And cracks are where the light gets in." That night, back at his small kitchen table, Jack pulled out his notebook. "Lila, I gave a speech today, in a boardroom, in front of people who never got dirt under their nails. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't ashamed of who I was. I saw the way they looked at me, at Ellie, at those kids. We didn't make them believe in kindness, not all of them, not yet, but we made them look it in the eye. And that's something. I miss you tonight." I wish you'd seen me. Love, Jack. The next morning, Jack arrived early to the garage. Miguel was already there sitting on the steps with a bag of tools at his feet. What's the rush? Jack asked. Miguel shrugged. Didn't want to waste the day. Jack nodded, and for a while they worked in companionable silence. Then Miguel said unprompted, My mom smiled yesterday, said she's proud of me. I didn't know she still could smile like that. Jack paused, looked over at him. That's good, he said softly. Hold on to it. Miguel nodded. Then you gonna stick around, Jack? Even if they don't fund it, Jack tightened a bolt. Long as there's something worth fixing, I'll be here. And as the sun rose higher through the garage windows, spilling gold across the floor and over the backs of bent heads and busy hands, Jack Branson realized something simple and profound. He wasn't late anymore. He had arrived right where he was always meant to be. Rain tapped against the garage windows like a soft drumbeat. Inside the usually buzzing shop was quieter than usual. The morning air hung thick with tension. The teens moved slower. Fewer jokes. Even Miguel kept his headphones in today, tuning out the world as he tightened bolts on a push mower. Jack felt it the second he walked in. Something was off. He found Ellie in the back office, arms folded, staring at the corkboard where she'd pinned up their expansion plans, maps, progress, charts, photos of students mid-task. None of it had moved since the board meeting. She looked up, weary. They're pulling the plug, she said without preamble. Jack blinked. What? The board reviewed everything. The testimonials, the numbers, Miguel's video. It wasn't enough. They want to streamline efforts, which is corporate speak for cutting anything that doesn't produce immediate profit. Jack's jaw tensed. How long do we have? 2 weeks. Then they'll reassign the building, terminate the pilot. Jack stared at the corkboard, heart pounding. They didn't even come see it themselves, he muttered. Ellie nodded. That's what hurts the most. They made the decision from 2,000 miles away without looking anyone in the eye. Silence. Then Jack asked, What are you going to do? Ellie didn't answer. She just pulled a file folder off the desk and handed it to him. It was the project closure packet, official forms, property inventories, legal boilerplate. But sitting on top was something unexpected. Jack's resignation letter, his own handwriting, dated a month ago. He stared at it. You never turned it in, Ellie said quietly. But you wrote it. Jack ran a thumb along the edge of the paper. The words stared back at him like a bruise he thought had healed. I thought I was in the way, that I was part of the problem. Ellie crossed her arms. And now I think maybe I was just scared to believe I still mattered. Ellie looked down, then spoke softly. So what now, Jack? He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped out of the office, heart heavy, and returned to the main floor. Miguel glanced up but didn't speak. Neither did the others. They'd already felt the shift, even if no one had said it out loud yet. Jack stood there watching them. Young lives mid-flight, hopeful, fragile, unfinished. He couldn't save the program, but he could decide how it would end. That afternoon, Jack stayed late after the kids had gone home. The shop was quiet again, only the soft hum of the vending machine filling the space. He walked slowly from one workstation to the next, touching the tools, the benches, the half-repaired equipment. He saw ghosts here, not the haunting kind, but the hopeful ones. A memory of Sarah finally threading a bolt on her own. Miguel laughing for the first time. The kid who used to stutter whenever he asked a question, but now rattled off engine parts like poetry. Jack pulled out his notebook and wrote without pausing. Lila, I lost the shop today. Not mine, really. But it felt like home for the first time in years. They're shutting us down. Say it doesn't scale. Doesn't make enough noise. But you know what? We built something anyway. Me and a bunch of kids and a woman who remembered something no one else would have. We turned rust into rhythm. Quiet into courage. I wanted to run when I heard the news. Old habit. But I didn't. This time I stayed. Love, Jack. He closed the notebook gently. Then he got up, rolled his sleeves, and began to clean. Not because it was ending, but because they had done something worth honoring. The next morning, Jack called an early team meeting. The students filed in groggy but alert. A few looked worried. Word had started to trickle down. Jack stood in front of the old tractor, the first machine they ever fixed together. I won't lie to you, he said plainly. The program's ending, not because of anything you did wrong, but because the people in charge never saw what we built here. A few heads dropped. One girl wiped at her eyes. But I see it, Jack continued. Every one of you is proof that this place mattered. And just because they're shutting the doors doesn't mean the work stops. You've got the skills now. You've got each other. Don't let anyone tell you this was for nothing. He paused, then stepped aside to reveal a row of toolkits, each one labeled with a name. I built these for you. You're taking them with you. Not as a goodbye, as a start. Gasps, whispers. Some tried to hide their emotion, others didn't bother. Miguel stepped forward, opening his kit. Inside quality tools, a handwritten note from Jack, and a small engraved wrench that simply read, "You belong." He looked up. You're really leaving? Jack hesitated, then nodded. For now. But I'm not disappearing. Ellie stepped into the circle, then holding a cardboard box. Before you go, she said, we have something too. She opened the box and pulled out a frame. Inside was a photograph, Jack standing beside the tractor arms, crossed grease on his face. Miguel and the others crowded around him laughing. Below it, engraved in brass in honor of Jack Branson, who fixed more than engines. He restored belief. Jack stared at the frame, speechless. He blinked hard, then finally said, that's not going in my living room. It belongs on this wall. And it was. They mounted it above the main tool cabinet. That evening, after the shop emptied, Ellie stood in the doorway, while Jack locked up for the final time. You still writing letters, she asked. Jack smiled. Every night. She nodded. You should think about sharing them. The world needs reminders like that. He looked at her. You reminded me first. They stood in the quiet. The sky above had softened into gold and lavender. You know, Jack said I was just trying to make it to the job fair that day. Ellie turned to him, her smile gentle. And I was just trying to return a kindness from 2009. Jack held her gaze for a long beat. Funny how being late can bring you right on time. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. But the connection between them deepened in the space between words, solid, unspoken, and undeniably real. Then Jack walked to his truck toolbox slung over his shoulder. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He carried the garage and everyone in it forward. The garage was quiet now, stripped of its chaos and charm. Workbenches stood bare, toolkits gone. A soft echo lingered in the air, as if the laughter and labor of the last few months hadn't quite accepted their eviction yet. Jack stood at the center of it all, one hand on the now dormant tractor engine. A single note hung on the wall, taped beside the engraved photo. Thank you for giving us back our hands. M. He didn't need a signature. He knew it was Miguel. Jack let out a slow breath and stepped away. The building would be locked up for good by Monday. Ellie had fought for an extension to let the students say their goodbyes, and for that Jack was grateful. But now the space felt like a closed book, one filled with dog-eared pages and notes in the margins. He packed the last of his personal tools into a battered red toolbox his father's passed down like a sacred thing. On the bottom tray, half covered in dust, was a folded note he hadn't seen in years. Jack frowned, pulled it free. It was yellowed, the ink fading. Jack, if you're reading this, it means the shop's yours now. You've got what it takes, kid. Just don't forget machines break. People break. But if you treat them both with care, they tend to come back to life. Proud of you. Ray had been his first mentor, a wiry old man with cigarette-stained fingers and a quiet laugh. Jack had worked under him for 6 years before Ray passed, and never quite realized how much of the man's wisdom had become his own spine. He slid the note into his back pocket. That afternoon, Jack returned home to a silent house. Emily was away for the weekend visiting college friends, and the place felt bigger than it should have. He dropped his keys, poured a cup of coffee, and sat at the table where his notebook weighted dog-eared, worn pages, filled with unsent thoughts to the woman he still spoke to, in ink. He picked up the pen. Lila, the shop's closed. Ellie fought until the last moment, but the suits won. They always do, don't they? But here's the thing, they didn't win the story. That place changed something in me, and in them, in Miguel, in Ellie, in me most of all. I used to write to you because it was the only way to remember who I was. But lately, I think I've started writing to remember who I could be. You'd like Ellie. She sees things in people, the kind of things you used to see in me before I did. She found something I left behind on a highway in 2009, and somehow she gave it back. Love, Jack. He closed the notebook slowly. The phone buzzed. A message from Ellie, "You free tonight?" He smiled and typed back, "I've got leftover meatloaf and 2 clean mugs." An hour later, Ellie stepped through his front door, holding a bottle of red wine and a small envelope. "Cabernet enclosure," she said. He laughed. "I'll take both." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one Jack and Emily had eaten countless meals at. Ellie poured the wine and Jack dished up 2 warm plates. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air. "It's strange," she said after the first few bites. "I thought I'd feel more defeated." Jack looked at her. "You don't? I feel like we started something, even if it ended sooner than I wanted." She paused. "It's hard to explain." Jack nodded. "It's not the shop I miss. It's the spark, the change you could see happening right in front of you." She reached into her coat and handed him the envelope. "I meant to give this to you earlier." He opened it. Inside was a simple photo taken from the side, blurry, clearly not staged. It was Jack standing in front of the class showing Miguel how to align an engine belt. He wasn't smiling. He was focused, steady, in control, but the boy beside him was lit up, alive, listening like it mattered. Jack stared at the photo for a long moment. "Then where did you get this?" "One of the students took it, sent it to me the day after we announced the closure. Said they wanted to remember the moment they realized they could be something more." Jack ran a finger along the edge of the frame. "You did that," she said. "You gave them back the right to believe in themselves." He didn't know what to say. Ellie took a sip of wine and added, "I'm not giving up, Jack. I've already started drafting a new proposal. Different cities, independent funding, smaller scale maybe, but more agile. I want you with me." Jack looked up. "I'm not promising a paycheck yet," she said with a smirk, "but I can promise purpose. And a place to keep doing what you do best." He sat back in his chair, letting the weight of her words settle into him. Not a rescue, not a favor, a partnership. "Let me think about it," he said. "Of course." They sat in silence for a while, sipping wine, the kind of silence that didn't press or demand. Jack looked at Ellie, lit by the soft glow of the kitchen light, and saw not just the woman from the job fair, but the one who had been quietly waiting at the edge of his memory for 16 years. "You ever wonder," he said, "what would have happened if I hadn't stopped on that highway?" Ellie smiled, tilting her glass. "I think we both would have gotten where we needed to go, eventually, but maybe it would have taken longer to believe we deserved to." Jack stared into the dark swirl of wine in his glass. Then softly he said, "I've written you letters." She blinked. "Me, well, sort of. Letters to Lila, my late wife. But the last few, they've been more about you than her." Ellie set her glass down gently. "You don't have to explain." "No," he said. "But I want to." She looked at him then, with that same quiet steadiness she'd always had, the same look she gave to a broken boy with a wrench or a man with doubts wrapped in flannel. It wasn't pity. It wasn't expectation. It was presence. And it was everything Jack had forgotten how to hold. Outside, rain whispered against the windows again. But inside, something stirred, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. Like the turning of an engine long thought dead. Like a life deciding to run again. The next morning, Jack woke early. Not because of the sunrise or the noise from the street, but because of something that had taken root inside him the night before resolve. He brewed coffee, fed the neighbor's cat like he always did when they were out of town, then sat at the table staring at the photo Ellie had given him. Him and Miguel. That engine belt. There was something about it, about the raw, unposed moment, that gnawed at him in the best way. Not pride, not nostalgia. Proof. Proof that he hadn't just wandered into something meaningful. He'd helped build it. And even if the walls of the garage were empty now, the work wasn't. He pulled out his notebook. But this time he didn't write to Lila. He wrote to Miguel. "Hey kid, that mower you rebuilt, the one with the cracked flywheel and the stubborn belt tensioner, that was tougher than most grown men I know. But you didn't give up. You listened to it. You respected it. That means something. Machines aren't so different from people. They don't need perfect parts. They just need someone to believe they're still worth fixing. Keep turning the wrench. Jack." He folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into his coat. 2 hours later, Jack found himself pulling into the gravel lot of a local community center, one of the places Ellie had marked on her expansion blueprint. A bare-bones building, red brick, faded flag out front. No fanfare, no polished marble, But when he stepped inside, he saw what mattered. Tables pushed together to form makeshift workbenches. Cardboard boxes full of disassembled weed whackers and broken drills. About a dozen teens in hoodies and ripped jeans tapping on their phones until they noticed the newcomer. And at the far end, Ellie. She was in the middle of explaining torque ratios to a skeptical-looking girl with grease on her cheek. When she looked up and saw Jack, she paused but didn't smile right away. Not yet. He gave her a small nod. She stepped away from the group and met him halfway. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure I'd stay home," Jack replied. "Turns out sitting still doesn't suit me anymore." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you here to audit or to work?" He held up his toolbox. "You tell me." Ellie's smile came slowly, but it was real. "Class," she called out, "this is Jack. He's the reason I know you don't need a degree to change someone's life." The kids looked him over. One of them asked, "You, the tractor guy?" Jack grinned. "That's me." A chair scraped back. The girl Ellie had been tutoring, maybe 15, hair dyed green at the ends, jerked her chin at the engine on the table. "You know how to fix this piece of junk." Jack stepped forward, rolled up his sleeves. "Let's find out." By noon, Jack had completely lost track of time. The world had shrunk down to the click of sockets, the murmur of instruction, the quiet light in the eyes of a boy who finally understood how to read spark plug wear. It wasn't the original garage, but the heart of it had traveled here in people, not walls. Ellie brought over a sandwich and a bottle of water. "Eat. You haven't stopped in 3 hours." Jack wiped his hands and took a seat on the back steps, stretching his legs. "Feels good to sweat again," he said, "in a way that matters." Ellie sat beside him. "They like you." He nodded. "I like them." She hesitated, then added, "I met with a group last week. Private funders. Not suits. People who get it. They're not promising miracles, but they're interested. And if they come through, we can replicate this model. On our terms." Jack looked over at her. "You're not done, are you?" Her eyes met his. Not even close. For a moment, the air was still. Then Jack reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wrench, engraved like the ones he'd made for the last garage crew. He handed it to her. She read the words etched along the side. "The ones who listen always fix the most." Ellie blinked, then looked up. "You made this." "I made it before I even knew if I'd see you again," Jack admitted. I needed a way to say thank you." She turned the wrench over in her hands. "You fixed a lot more than machines, Jack." He didn't respond. He just looked back out at the lot where Miguel had just pulled up on a battered bicycle, panning a backpack slung over his shoulder. Miguel spotted Jack and grinned wide. "Heard you were here." Jack raised his eyebrows. "You following me now?" Miguel laughed. "Maybe. Or maybe I just knew where you'd go when you couldn't stop helping people." He held up a piece of folded paper. "Got something for you." Jack unfolded it. Inside was a sketch pencil, smudged but full of intention. It was a diagram of an engine. Not precise, not technical, but labeled with care, trust, patience, time, belief. Jack swallowed. Miguel shrugged. "I don't know if I'm good at art, but that's what I learned. Thought you should have it." Jack folded the paper gently and tucked it into his notebook. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Ellie stood. "You two done with the hallmark moment?" Miguel grinned. "Maybe." "Good. There's an old snowblower that needs diagnosing." Jack stood and cracked his knuckles. "Let's teach it to talk." And they returned to the work not because they had to, but because it mattered. That night, Jack sat in his truck outside the center engine, idling headlights off. He opened his notebook and wrote one more letter, not to Lila, not to Miguel, not even to Ellie. To the stranger reading this someday, if you're wondering whether small things matter, they do. If you're doubting that kindness sticks, it does. And if you think it's too late to start again, it isn't. Someone stopped for a dead battery in 2009. Today, I helped a kid believe in himself because of that moment. You don't need a crowd, just one act, one person, one spark. Start there. Jack Branson. He closed the notebook, set it on the passenger seat, and as the engine purred to life, Jack drove forward, not away from something, but toward it. Wherever it was going, he belonged on that road. The following week, Jack found himself standing in front of a small-town high school gymnasium that had been temporarily transformed into a makeshift workshop. Work tables were pushed to the edges of the room. Half-disassembled machines sat like puzzles waiting to be solved. The air smelled of sawdust, motor oil, and potential. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. This was Site 2, a new partnership Ellie had secured through a coalition of civic leaders and private donors. The facility was run by the town's Youth Development Council, and for now it was being used to test whether Jack's pilot-style program could take root in different soil. And if this place had anything, it was good soil, scrappy, honest, and hungry. Jack hung his flannel jacket on a nail by the door and surveyed the space. A dozen young people milled around waiting. Some were clearly skeptical. Others tried not to look too interested. One kid kept tossing a screwdriver in the air and catching it by the handle. "All right," Jack called, clapping his hands once. "Who here thinks they're going to break something today?" 3 tentative hands rose. A few chuckles followed. Jack grinned. "Good. You're my kind of people." He pointed to an engine block in the center of the room. "That right there. It's not just parts and wires. It's a challenge. It'll lie to you, frustrate you, and then just when you're about to quit, it'll come alive." He paused, letting the words settle. "Kind of like us." A girl in the front, probably 17, tilted her head. "You a mechanic or a poet?" Jack smiled. "Depends on the day. Today I'm your instructor. Tomorrow maybe your student." Later, after the first group session, Jack stepped outside into the crisp air to clear his head. He'd always found comfort in the mechanical hum of tools, but teaching that was different. It required a different kind of wiring, one he was only just learning to trust. Ellie joined him a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of gas station coffee. She handed one over without speaking. They leaned against the side of her rental van, watching the sun dip low behind the trees. "You're good with them," she said. Jack shrugged. "I'm good with machines." "No," she said. "You're good with people who feel like broken machines." He chuckled. "I don't know if that's a compliment." "It is," she said. "It really is." They sipped in silence for a moment. Then Ellie added, "I had a meeting this morning. A school district outside Missoula wants to pilot the program next spring." Jack looked over. Already Ellie nodded. They saw the footage from the original site. And Miguel's interview made the rounds on social media. Apparently he's a bit of a local hero now. Jack smiled slowly. "Kids got more heart than horsepower." Ellie's voice softened. "You gave him direction. You gave a lot of them that." Jack looked down at the coffee cup in his hands. "No," he said quietly. "I just gave them a place to belong. You gave them the chance to believe that place could exist." She touched his arm, and for a second they didn't speak. Then Ellie reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder. "I want to show you something." Jack opened it. Inside were printed letters, scanned and retyped, each one written by students from the first garage site. Thank you notes, reflections, short essays. One in particular caught his eye. It was from Sarah, the shy girl who couldn't even make eye contact on her first day. "Dear Jack, before the shop I thought I was stupid. My teachers thought I was lazy. I never raised my hand. But you gave me a busted vacuum and said, 'Take your time. It's not a race.' That day I realized I was just scared, not broken. Thank you for seeing me before I saw myself." Jack cleared his throat, folded the letter. "They're the ones doing the real work." Ellie nodded. "Yes, but they needed someone who knew what it meant to feel lost and not be judged for it." She looked at him, eyes serious now. "Jack, I don't want you to just train kids. I want you to help lead this." He blinked. "You mean, like permanently?" She nodded. "Not just a wrench in hand." A voice at the table. "We're building something here, and I can't do it alone." The thought of it made his chest tighten. Jack Branson, who once scraped by on oil changes and weekend tow jobs, now being asked to help guide a movement. He thought of Lila, of the cold winters, the fear in Emily's eyes when the power went out, of all the years he'd worked just to stay afloat. He wasn't just floating anymore. He was steering. He took a long breath. "If I say yes, I want one condition." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Go on. We don't turn it into a numbers game. Not ever. We measure what matters: confidence, courage, trust." Her eyes softened. "Deal." He extended a hand. She took it without hesitation, and something passed between them in that moment. Not romance, not yet, but alignment. A deep and abiding understanding that they had seen the worst in the world, and instead of hardening, they had chosen to build. That night Jack returned to his motel room, a humble place, with old wallpaper and a heater that clanked like it was telling stories. He sat on the bed, opened his notebook, and began to write. Lila, you always said there'd be a day I wouldn't need to talk to you like this anymore, that I'd start talking to the world again. I think today was that day. I said yes, to a future I didn't know I deserved. There's still grief in me, still rust. But there's fire now too. And someone who looks at me like I'm still worth the work. Not just Ellie. These kids, this mission. We're fixing more than engines now. We're fixing futures. Love, Jack. He placed the notebook on the nightstand, lay back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the stars were just beginning to pierce the dark, and Jack Branson, latecomer, widower, quiet mechanic, closed his eyes with the peace of a man no longer running from the past. But finally, running towards something better. The town of Missoula hadn't changed much since Jack's last visit years ago. Same winding roads, same gray skies, same cracked sidewalks and grocery stores with faded signs. But this time, as he pulled into the parking lot of the vocational high school hosting Ellie's third pilot program, everything felt different. He wasn't here to look for work. He was here to give it. The gymnasium turned workshop was twice the size of the one in Willow Creek. Rows of rusted equipment lined the back wall. Generators, lawn tractors, busted riding mowers. Jack's fingers tingled at the sight, the same way they always had before a big job. Not nerves, but anticipation. Possibility. Ellie met him at the double doors with a clipboard in hand and fire in her step. Glad you're early for once, she teased. Jack grinned. Figured 16 years of being late was enough. Come on, she said, leading him inside. You're going to want to see this. She brought him to the center of the room where a small crowd was already gathered. Journalists with notepads, a couple of district reps in jackets, too clean for a place like this, and at the heart of it all, a familiar green tractor, the same model as the one from the original shop. Jack froze. It was spotless, repainted, restored, gleaming like something from a showroom floor. A small plaque had been mounted just below the seat. The pilot engine. The first machine repaired under the Warner Initiative 2025, restored by Jack Branson and students, where kindness turns the key. He stepped closer, hand brushing the metal. His throat tightened. You kept it, he murmured. Ellie's voice was soft beside him. We shipped it out here 2 weeks ago. I thought it deserved a second life. Jack looked at her, eyes glassy. So did I. The event kicked off with speeches, but none of them felt like corporate fluff. These were people who had seen what Jack and Ellie were building: educators, small business owners, even 2 parents whose teens were in the new program. When Ellie took the mic, the room fell into respectful quiet. People ask me all the time how this started, she said. And I always say the same thing. It started on a snowy highway in 2009. She smiled gently at Jack across the room. I had a dead battery and no cell service. A stranger pulled over and fixed my car without asking for anything. He left before I even got his name. I never forgot that moment. Because when someone shows you kindness when you have nothing to offer, it stays with you. She paused. What I didn't know then was that one day that same man would help me build something even bigger than a second chance. He'd help me build hope. Not just for me, but for hundreds of kids who'd been told they weren't enough. She gestured toward the students seated along the wall. These young men and women aren't statistics. They're builders. They're creators. And all they needed was a place where someone said, try, you matter. Ellie's voice didn't tremble, but her eyes shimmered. And that place started with Jack Branson. Applause rippled through the gym. Jack shifted in his seat, uncomfortable in the way people get when they're recognized for something they never expected to be noticed. When it was his turn to speak, he kept it short. I don't have fancy words, he said. I just know that every broken thing deserves a chance to run again. Including people. He looked toward the students, especially people. After the event, Ellie found Jack in the back lot, sitting on the tailgate of his truck, with a thermos in one hand and a piece of cornbread wrapped in napkin in the other. She sat beside him, kicking off her heels and wiggling her toes. Think we made a dent? He asked. I think we cracked the surface, she replied. That's how the light gets in. They sat in quiet for a while, listening to the wind whisper through the chain-link fence. Then Ellie spoke, hesitant at first. You know, I never told you the rest of the story from 2009. Jack looked over. No. She shook her head. After you drove away, I waited another 2 hours for a tow truck that never came. But those 2 hours weren't wasted. I wrote something that day on the back of a receipt, a sentence I've kept in my wallet ever since. She reached into her bag, pulled out a worn slip of paper, and handed it to him. Jack unfolded it carefully. The smallest kindness leaves the longest echo. He read it again. You wrote this, I did, and I built a life around it. Jack looked at her, his voice low. I think I've been chasing that echo without realizing it. Ellie smiled. Maybe we both have. That evening, Ellie invited him to dinner, not a restaurant but her home. It was a modest craftsman-style house on the edge of town, warm light glowing from inside a dog-eared porch swing, creaking in the breeze. Inside, the scent of baked rosemary chicken and garlic filled the air. There were mismatched chairs around the table and a stack of old vinyl records in the corner. It felt lived in. It felt real. After they ate, Jack offered to do the dishes. Ellie handed him a towel and leaned beside the sink watching him. You're quiet, she said. Just thinking. He dried a plate slowly. About how I never expected any of this. Any of what he looked at her, direct open. This. Us. Second chances that feel like first ones. Ellie's expression softened. She took the plate from his hands and set it down. Then without a word, she stepped closer, wrapped her arms gently around him, and rested her head against his chest. For a long moment, they didn't speak. No need. There were no declarations, no fireworks. Just connection, the kind that only comes when two people meet in the long echo of something true. Later that night, back in his motel room, Jack opened his notebook one more time. But this time, he didn't write to the past. He wrote to the future. Dear Emily, I don't know if you'll ever read these pages, but if you do, I hope you'll see your old man not as the guy who got stuck fixing cars, but the one who learned how to fix himself. I want you to know that it's never too late to begin again. Not just survive, but build. With your hands, with your heart. And if one day you find someone who reminds you who you are, when you forget, hold on. Even if it takes 16 years to arrive. Love, Dad. He closed the notebook, and for the first time in his life, he felt like everything that had broken had led him exactly here to this table, this purpose, this woman, this truth. Where kindness wasn't just an act, it was a beginning. The winter sun in Missoula rose late and fell early, casting long amber shadows through the windows of the newly secured fourth site of the Warner Initiative, a repurposed lumber warehouse on the edge of town. Cold drafts slipped through the corrugated metal siding, but no one complained. The space buzzed with energy, kids hammering new workbenches into place, others wheeling in crates of salvage parts. Jack walked through it all with purpose, clipboard in hand, marking inventory, offering instructions, smiling more freely than he used to. He wore the same work coat he always had, frayed at the cuffs, elbows patched, but now it carried a different weight. Authority, yes, but also belonging. He stopped when he reached the back wall, a towering panel of old pine boards. That wall had once separated the mill's loading bay from the main work floor. Now it loomed like a relic, windowless and worn, splitting the space in two. This thing's got to go, Jack muttered. A voice behind him agreed. It's in the way. He turned. Ellie stood there with a rolled-up architectural sketch in one hand and a thermos in the other. Jack tapped the wooden panel with a knuckle. It's solid. Old-school craftsmanship, but it's keeping light from getting into half the building. Ellie sipped her coffee. You know you're not just talking about a wall, right? He gave a wry smile. I never am. She raised an eyebrow. So what's the plan? Jack looked over at a group of teens prepping to run wiring for new outlets. We teach them how to tear it down without wrecking everything around it. Ellie nodded. And we let them build what comes next. 2 hours later, the back half of the warehouse echoed with the sound of crowbars, mallets, and controlled demolition. Jack supervised while a team of 5 students carefully disassembled the barrier, one board at a time. There was dust and some swearing, but also laughter. It wasn't just about taking something down. It was about unblocking what was ready to grow. Miguel, who had taken to traveling out on weekends to volunteer at the new sites, was there too, taller now, his voice deeper. He stood beside Jack, watching the progress, with folded arms. You ever think we'd come this far? He asked. Jack watched a beam fall cleanly to the floor and shrugged. Some days, no. Some days I wonder why it took so long. Miguel nodded. But we're here. Yeah, Jack said. We're here. Later that afternoon, with the wall finally down, Ellie rolled out the plans she'd been sketching for months: open bay work areas, a welding corner, a computer diagnostics table. But it wasn't just blueprints anymore. It was becoming. And at the center of the room, Jack pinned up a large corkboard with a wooden frame hand-carved by one of the students who had dropped out of traditional school but excelled here. At the top of the board, a small plaque read, "The Wall of Tries." Ellie read it aloud, curious. Tries. Jack smiled. Not triumphs, not trophies. Tries. Things that took effort. Things that failed but mattered. Everyone gets to pin something up here: broken parts, first drafts, pictures of engines that never turned over. Ellie looked at him quiet. "That's beautiful," she said. "I just want them to remember that trying is what counts. We teach kids how to fix machines, but really we're teaching them how to stay in the fight." That night, a community dinner was held in the same space: folding tables, covered in mismatched tablecloths, slow cookers lined up against the wall, and families sitting elbow to elbow, some for the first time in a long time. Jack found himself seated beside a student named Tyrese, who had brought both his grandmothers. They were proudly passing around photos of the boy holding a torquey wrench. "He doesn't yell as much anymore," one of them said with a grin. "Now he explains." Jack chuckled. "Explaining is half the job." Across the room, Ellie gave a short speech thanking local leaders, volunteers, and donors. But when she finished, she didn't return to her seat. She walked to where Jack sat and gently tapped her glass again. "Sorry," she said. "One more thing." Jack raised an eyebrow. She took a breath. "Some of you know this all started because of a man who fixed my car 16 years ago and then vanished into a snowstorm. I never got to say thank you until this year." She turned to Jack, her voice thick now. "I don't know where I'd be if he hadn't stopped that night, but I know where I am now and who I've become because of the way he kept showing up after." The room quieted. Jack's eyes dropped to the table. But he didn't look away in shame. He looked away because his heart was full. When Ellie sat beside him again, he whispered, "That was a bit much." She leaned close. It was just right. After most had left, Jack lingered behind, sweeping the floor, resetting chairs. Miguel helped quietly, and when they finished, Jack walked to the wall of trees. He took something from his pocket, a torn and folded job fair flyer, yellowed at the edges. He pinned it dead center on the board. Miguel looked at it, smiling. "That the one you were late to?" "Yeah," Jack said. "The one that changed everything." Miguel nodded. "Good try. Best one I ever made." Back at home, Jack pulled open the drawer where his notebook always waited. But tonight he didn't write. Instead, he took out a blank sheet and wrote only a name across the top: Emily Branson. Below it, he began drafting the outline of something new, a training manual. Not just for fixing engines, but for teaching kindness, patience, grace, the things that no wrench could reach, but that every mechanic, mentor, and human needed to understand. Ellie had once told him the world needed more reminders. Jack was ready to write one, not a letter to the past, but a blueprint for the future. The morning of the National Vocational Education Conference dawned crisp and clear, the kind of Montana winter day that seemed to hold its breath with promise. Jack adjusted his tie in the hotel mirror, an honest-to-God tie, and grimaced at the uneven knot. Emily, perched on the corner of the bed, chuckled softly. "Want me to fix that?" Jack sighed and turned. "I still don't know how you got this thing on me. You're representing the entire Warner Initiative at a national level. You can't go up there looking like you just climbed out from under a snowplow." "I did climb out from under a snowplow 2 days ago." Emily stood and smoothed his collar. "And now you're standing in front of 1,000 educators, policymakers, and foundation heads. Look at you, Dad. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Jack's throat tightened, and not because of the tie. He kissed her forehead, and together they stepped out into the hallway, where Ellie was waiting in a dark navy pantsuit that made her look every bit the part of a visionary CEO. But when she smiled at Jack, it wasn't with polish. It was with pride. "You ready?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I'm going anyway." She grinned. "That's the spirit." The conference auditorium was a sea of suits and tablets and industry jargon. But as Jack and Ellie took their seats on the panel stage, the backdrop screen lit up, not with statistics or pie charts, but with a single unpolished photograph. It was the old tractor, the pilot engine, and beneath it, in plain lettering, "Where kindness turns the key." Jack leaned toward Ellie. "You picked that photo." She shrugged, eyes twinkling. people trust what's real. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he stepped to the podium slowly. He cleared his throat once, then looked out at the crowd. They weren't his usual audience, no grimy hands, no tired teens. But he remembered what Ellie had said the first time they met again. "I've been waiting since 2009. He nodded to himself, then began. "I'm not a teacher, not officially. I'm not a public speaker or an academic or a curriculum designer." Some chuckles. "I'm a mechanic. I fix things, mostly engines. Sometimes generators. Occasionally, myself." More laughter. "But what I've learned in the last year is that the most important machines I've ever worked on were people." The room hushed. "I work with kids who've been called problems, who've been written off before they've even been given a real job application. And all I do is hand them a wrench and say, 'Let's figure it out together.' And you know what happens?" He paused. "They show up, not perfectly, not all at once, but they come back. They try, they fail, and then they try again. And in that process, they begin to believe that they're not broken beyond repair." He pointed toward the photo behind him. "That tractor. That was the first engine we fixed in the Warner garage. It didn't run. It hadn't run in years. Everyone said it was scrap, but we didn't throw it out. We listened, we gave it time, we gave it dignity, and it came back to life." He let the silence stretch before finishing. "I believe education should work the same way. Applause. Not the polite kind. The kind that rose and grew and didn't stop." Jack stepped down, cheeks flushed, heart thudding. Ellie met him halfway. "You knocked it out of the park," she said. Jack shook his head. "I just told the truth. That's what they needed." That evening, the hotel bar buzzed with post-conference chatter, but Jack, Ellie, and Emily found a quiet corner booth by the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady. "I've got news," Ellie said, setting her wine glass down. Jack raised an eyebrow. "The good kind depends," she teased. "We've been offered a partnership with a national trade association. They want to scale the initiative. 50 sites in the next 3 years." Jack nearly dropped his fork. 50, Ellie nodded. "They want us to lead the advisory board. You and me. Co-chairs." Jack stared. "I was fixing mufflers under a pop-up canopy last spring, and now you're designing futures." Emily raised her glass. "To second chances that aren't second class." They clinked their glasses, and Jack leaned back, the weight of the moment pressing gently on his chest, but not heavily, like a hand resting there steady and warm. He looked at Ellie. "Why me?" She didn't hesitate. "Because you don't walk away. You show up. You listen. You believe." He nodded slowly. "I think I'm finally starting to believe it too." Later that night, Jack returned to his hotel room alone. He stepped out onto the small balcony, snowflakes catching in his hair, the city lights of Missoula glowing below. He took out his notebook one final time, but this time he didn't write a letter. He didn't need to. Instead, he flipped back through the pages, through years of pain and hope and growth and quiet resolve. And then in the very last empty space, he scribbled a single line: "I didn't arrive late. I arrived when it mattered." He closed the book. Behind him, the room was still. Ahead of him, the world was wide open. And beside him, whether in memory and purpose or in love, stood every moment that had shaped him. Jack Branson, the man who was once just trying to get to a job fair on time, had become something else entirely. Not just a mechanic, not just a mentor, a builder of better beginnings. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking back. He was looking forward, right on time. Before you go, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. It always warms our hearts to see how far these stories reach. And if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to subscribe for more uplifting tales about hope, healing, and the quiet power of kindness. Thank you so much for watching. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope to see you again in the next story.